Welcome back to State of the Union. With the organized and strategic chaos coming from the new Trump administration, what are the Democrats who are in the minority to do? Here with me now is Democratic Senator Cory Booker of the great state of New Jersey. He is the chair of the Senate Democrats Strategic Communications Committee. Thank you so much for being here, sir. Sir, I want to start with what the Trump administration really acknowledges, that this is their strategy. Flood the zone, do as much at once as they can to overwhelm the system and Democrats like you. A lot of what they're doing, though, was laid out in Project 2025, which you and other Democrats repeatedly warned voters about. So why didn't you have a better plan?
Well, again, I think the plan right now is working as four parts. One is a legal strategy to stop him from violating the separation of powers, from violating our civil service laws, civil rights laws. And we're winning. We see 41 cases being taken, 10 of them last week, 12 of them, were successful in stopping some of his illegal actions. The next is a legislative and oversight effort to really try to expose it, not to treat this as Democrat versus Republican, right or left, but really right or wrong, and continue to try to use our positions procedurally as well as legislatively to stop what he's doing. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, because all of us have to have a role, from the media to everyday citizens, which is shining a light on the dark corners of what they're doing and how it is actually endangering Americans' lives, is threatening to raise the cost of people's everyday goods and inflation and more. We've been successful in the past, from turning up the heat on him to stopping him from tearing away health care in his first administration, to even when he did one of those awful illegal acts of trying to stop government funding of our first responders, our veterans, our meal programs. The outrage of Americans actually stopped them from what they were doing, and then our legal strategy further put a bar on their ability to stop sourcing and funding vital resources for communities.
The New York Times reported that when pushed by fellow Democrats to do more to stop Trump, the Democratic Senate leader Chuck Schumer pointed in part to your leadership, what you're doing on social media and the messaging there. David Corn, who is a prominent journalist on the left, described your strategy as bringing a teaspoon to a gunfight. And he added, this is not how a party battling for its survival and the survival of the nations behave. What do you say to that?
Again, I've been blown away by what I'm seeing by everyday citizens joining together and beginning to shine a much better light on what's happening. Take USAID and the efforts last week to show that what the Trump administration has done is make Americans less safe from diseases like Ebola or treatment-resistant tuberculosis, taking away scientists on the front line of fighting these infectious diseases, because we know infectious diseases anywhere are a threat to human safety everywhere. And so a lot of the things that Trump is doing, that some of the biggest officials in our state, like, remember Secretary Mattis, his defense secretary, saying very bluntly, if you cut these kind of programs in the State Department, buy me more bullets, because it's going to mean that we're going to use military more. By shining a light on these things, by elevating, as we've seen online this past week, literally hundreds of millions of shares and likes exposing what's going on, this is giving us more strength in actually stopping him from doing what he's doing.
Republicans will almost certainly need Democrats to help keep the government open past March 14th. Are you willing to use the prospect of a government shutdown or even a default on the nation's debt as leverage to force some Trump concessions?
Look, the Republican Party has shown year after year that they're the party of shutdowns, they're the party of government chaos, they're the party that can't even within their own ranks pass these funding bills. And that's why, as you said, they're going to need us. What we are the party of is a party of protecting residents, protecting veterans, protecting first responders, protecting American safety from his illegal actions like shutting down FEMA. I mean, just think about that for a second. Or shutting down something like NOAA in a time of outrageous weather patterns that are causing flooding and more hurricanes. They are dismantling the protections of Americans' safety. So we're not looking to shut down the government. We're looking actually to protect people. And we're going to stand up against the kind of things that Donald Trump is doing that are hurting Americans, making us less safe and raising costs.
Senator, tactically, though, I know you're trying to shine a light on it. You're here doing this interview. You're working it online. But when it comes to the tools in your toolbox, there aren't a lot of them. One of them is to try to stop the government funding, to try to do maybe even default on the debt, as I said, or at least force that if the Republicans don't change course. Is that the strategy?
Let me just put it pointedly. The strategy is to do whatever we can to stop Donald Trump from hurting Americans, from making us less safe, less secure, and from raising our costs. We will look at every single tool in our toolbox, as we've done this last week, to make sure that we stop him from hurting people. At the end of the day, Donald Trump has promised America, I will bring down your costs and I'll make you safer. He clearly is doing the opposite. In addition to that, he's opening the floodgates for corruption in our system, from getting rid of inspector generals who have a track record under Democrat and Republican presidents of saving Americans billions of dollars from waste, fraud, and abuse, to letting Elon Musk, one of our biggest government contractors, one of our biggest military contractors, have access to America's most personal information, from your grandparents' medical information all the way down to people's social security information and other things. This is an astonishing allowance of corruption and abuse and violations of people's privacy and other most sacrosanct values. We are in a crisis right now, and Democrats will use every tool possible to protect Americans, to drive down costs, to make us safer. These are the very opposite that Donald Trump is doing to Americans right now.
President Trump and Elon Musk are, as you know, taking sweeping steps to reverse DEI initiatives across the United States. The president says he's actually protecting civil rights and making society, quote, colorblind and merit-based. Your response?
This is stunning to me, especially because they're really charging this word DEI as if it's something that undermines the ability for the government to hire the best people. It's actually the opposite of that. When we're trying to hire the best of the best, having a more inclusive search to go to HBCUs or Hispanic serving institutions to find as big of an applicant pool as possible, to me, these are the kind of things that help us to hire the best of the best. What Donald Trump is doing is successively lying to people under the guise of some noble ideal. But I remind people, as he talks about being a great government cutter, the last time the American budget was balanced, the last time we eliminated a deficit and began to reduce our debt was under Bill Clinton, who brought a plan to Congress and worked in partnership to lower costs. The person who is the biggest waste, fraud, and abuser, we know this objectively, the person who created the biggest profligate spending and hole in our budget was Donald Trump in his first term, who raised our deficit more than any modern president. And so we have to understand what's happening here. Okay, go ahead.
Senator, I'm sorry. I just want to turn back to this issue because of the DEI, because you just described from your perspective and a lot of people's perspectives, you know, in a nonpartisan way, some of the good things that DEI programs do. But you know, because you are in charge of Senate Democrats messaging, that that's not the perception of a lot of Americans, thanks in part to social media and the way that it's been perceived, and also perhaps the way Democrats have messaged up until now. Elaine Kamarck, who is a longtime Democratic strategist, she co-authored a report on what went wrong, where your party should go from here. She told me this week that Democrats are tone deaf on cultural issues. Is that a problem that you agree with, and should it be changed?
Again, these sweeping conclusions about every person who claims to be a Democrat in America is, to me, absurd. The reality is I work in a caucus of 47 people who have been standing up and fighting for the Americans in their state as best as they can. When they stand up and say hiring processes should be inclusive of women and minorities who often don't get an opportunity to apply for the jobs because the search parameters are so narrow and so small, that we should look at ways of searching our college campuses for better talent, making sure that we have diverse teams. Why? Because everybody from the Harvard Business School to some of our biggest consultants have shown that diverse teams are more successful at delivering missions. Private sector institutions understand this. So again, I know this is a time of labeling with a broad brush. Democrats are this, Republicans are that. This is the kind of thinking I think that's hurting our country. We need to be talking about how do we best achieve our goal with actually the most diverse nation on the planet Earth, that we have been successful as a country, whether it's going to the moon or beating the Nazis, have been done with everybody in our country getting on the field and participating in the best way possible. Donald Trump wants to try to demonize ideas of inclusion, of equity, of fairness, and that is unfortunate and frustrating, and he's using that as a way of ripping out entire aspects of our government that are vital. To tear down USAID under the guise of DEI has allowed our frontier scientists who were in places like Tanzania fighting Ebola. We no longer have the best scientists in the world from the United States of America fighting Ebola, fighting tuberculosis, fighting against bird flu. That has all been ripped away by Donald Trump using terms like DEI as a justification for making us less safe. We should be outraged that organizations and agencies created by Congress in a bipartisan way have now been torn down by a president who has no authority or does not have the legal justification for doing that. And so I understand that they want to distract you over here by talking about trans people. They want to talk about DEI. They want to talk about all these things as a distraction to the truth of what they're doing, which is making us less safe, making government more corrupt, violating people's privacy, and ultimately, how's that lower costs working for Americans? From eggs to housing, are we seeing any change in the cost of living for Americans? What executive order can you point to that has made things more affordable for Americans? Absolutely zero or none. But what has happened is a person like Elon Musk has had unfettered access to your data, to your most private information to use for God knows what, as a government contractor, as a government military contractor. What he can do with it is stunning.
Well, as you heard at the top of the show, we're going to continue to ask those questions. Thank you so much, Senator. Appreciate you being here.